James Lori was last seen in Willoughby, Ohio, on July 15, 2007, when his landlord stated that he moved out and mentioned plans to relocate to Maine. His family didn't report him missing immediately, as Lori, a photographer with international work, often disappeared without warning. However, after a year passed without any communication from him, they filed a missing persons report. Investigations revealed that the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office in Maine had run checks on Lori's car registration plates multiple times in August and September 2007. As a result, the case was transferred to Maine authorities. In August 2007, Lori's silver 1996 Pontiac Firebird, bearing Ohio license plates, was found abandoned in a parking lot off Route 96 in the Ocean Point area of East Boothbay, Maine. Local residents noted the car had been there for most of the summer, and several of Lori's personal belongings were discovered inside. The vehicle was eventually towed in October and placed in storage. Despite these findings, the circumstances surrounding Lori's disappearance remain unclear, and the investigation continues to be handled by Maine police. John Markley was last seen with his wife of 16 years, Shelly, at their home on Greenville Road in rural Bristolville, Ohio, on December 15, 1995. That morning, their 5 children went to school as usual. However, when they returned that afternoon, the house was unlocked, and both John and Shelly were gone. The couple's red and silver 1990 Chevrolet pickup truck was also missing, and no note was left behind. Inside the home, there were several unusual signs suggesting something was amiss. The gun cabinet upstairs, which was always kept locked, was found open. In the master bedroom, a small safe had been opened, and papers, including birth certificates, were scattered across the room. The beds were unmade, and some of John and Shelly's clothes were lying on their bed. In the kitchen, the coffee pot was still on and had nearly boiled dry, and John's wristwatch, which he habitually wore, was found resting on a shelf above the stove. Shelly's cigarettes, cigarette case, and lighter, which she typically carried everywhere, were left on the kitchen counter. In the garage, the tarps that always covered John's 1978 Corvette were missing, a highly unusual occurrence, as John never left the car exposed. Initially, the Markley children assumed their parents would return soon. Adding to the tension, John's twin sister had died of cancer just 2 days before his and Shelly's disappearance, and the couple had planned to attend the calling hours at the funeral home that evening at 5:30 p.m., with the funeral scheduled for the following day. John, distraught over his sister's death, had made it clear he intended to go to the services with his children. However, when the couple failed to return home by the time of the visitation, the children sought refuge at their aunt and uncle's nearby residence, hoping their parents would reappear. When they did not, the family proceeded to the funeral home without them. Concerned by the prolonged absence, John and Shelly's disappearance was officially reported to the police at 12:30 a.m. the next morning. The Markleys' missing truck was later discovered abandoned in the parking lot of a store in Bristolville, Ohio, approximately 10 miles from their home. The vehicle was locked, and the keys were missing, but inside the cab was the couple's cellular phone. In the truck bed, investigators found a tire for a semi-trailer truck and the tarps that had previously been removed from John's Corvette. The last known activity involving the Markleys occurred at 10:36 a.m. on the day they vanished, 2 hours after their children last saw them. A personal check for $1,000, made out to cash and signed by Shelly, was cashed at the Bank One in Bloomfield, Ohio, leaving $865 in the account. A bank teller at the drive-thru window recalled seeing the couple in their pickup truck during the transaction. According to her, John was driving, Shelly was seated in the middle, and another man, whose identity or description the teller could not provide, was sitting on the passenger side. At the time of his disappearance, John worked as an independent truck driver. He had no criminal record, no life insurance policy, and the family home was completely paid off. The Markleys also left behind a freezer stocked with food for the winter, suggesting they had no plans to leave. Investigators briefly considered a ransom scenario when one of John's co-workers claimed he was holding the couple for $10,000. However, authorities determined the man was simply an opportunist and had no connection to their disappearance. He was subsequently charged with extortion. Despite extensive investigations and searches, the circumstances surrounding John and Shelly Markley's disappearance remain unclear. Their case is believed to involve foul play, but no definitive answers have ever emerged. Claudia Lopez Escobar was last seen at a coworker's apartment in the 1700 block of Peasant Run West in Columbus, Ohio, at approximately 10 a.m. on March 23, 2012. She was driving a green 1996 Jeep Cherokee with a beige interior, black rims, and Ohio license plate FLT 6869. She never returned home and was reported missing when she failed to show up for work at American Corrugated Products on Alkire Road, where she had been employed for 6 months and was known as a dependable employee. Originally from a remote area near Tapachula, Mexico, on the border with Guatemala, Lopez Escobar was a naturalized American citizen who had lived in the United States for several years. Her 2 young sons were in Mexico under the care of her relatives, with whom she maintained regular contact and sent money. All communication with her family ceased after March 23. Lopez Escobar was last seen in the company of Sarai, a Cambodian-born co-worker who had been employed at American Corrugated Products for 12 years. Friends revealed that Lopez Escobar had dated I, but ended the relationship, after which he began stalking her. I disappeared in early April, and in May 2012, he was charged with murder, kidnapping, and gross abuse of a corpse in her case. Evidence found at I's apartment, including blood matching Lopez Escobar's DNA, indicated she had been killed there. Following an intensive manhunt, I was arrested in Janesville, Wisconsin, in November 2013. After his capture, he confessed to murdering Lopez Escobar, stating that he beat her with a marble bowl, suffocated her with a plastic bag, and took her body, disposed of the remains in trash bins around Columbus. I pleaded guilty to murder and evidence tampering, receiving a life sentence with no parole eligibility for at least 18 years. He is expected to be deported to Cambodia if released. Lopez Escobar's remains have never been recovered, and foul play is confirmed in her disappearance due to the horrific circumstances surrounding her death. Annabelle Ludwig was last seen at her home in the 1800 block of Rose Avenue in Cridersville, Ohio, on June 15, 1982. At the time, she was living with her former husband, Robert Ludwig, and 3 of their 4 children. Annabelle and Robert had been married since 1960, but their relationship was troubled from the start. It was marked by extramarital affairs on both sides, frequent separations, and multiple divorce filings. They eventually divorced in 1977. After their separation, Annabelle briefly married another man named Smith, but their relationship lasted only a month before she returned to Robert in 1978. Annabelle also had relationships with other men and struggled with substance abuse during this period of her life. One of Annabelle's boyfriends had moved to Florida in 1980 or 1981, and shortly before her disappearance, she mentioned to her family that she had heard from him and expressed a desire to go to Florida to be with him. However, she disappeared shortly after this conversation and left no note or explanation behind. Annabelle's family has not heard from her since. It was not unusual for her to leave her family for days or weeks without notice and then return suddenly, but this time she never came back. Despite this, Robert did not report her missing, and the police only began investigating her disappearance in August 1982, 2 months after she was last seen. There are some theories about Annabelle's fate. One suggests she may have been murdered and buried on a farm near Genera, Ohio, or at a property in Cridersville, but no evidence has been found to confirm these claims. At the time of her disappearance, Annabelle was unemployed and did not have a driver's license, making it unclear how she could have traveled or where she could have gone. Her parents both passed away in the years following her disappearance, but other relatives have continued to search for her and seek answers about what happened. The circumstances surrounding Annabelle Ludwig's disappearance remain unclear, and her case is still unsolved. Judy Martins was last seen on May 24, 1978, on the campus of Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. A junior at the university, Judy was majoring in art and minoring in women's studies. She was a dedicated student who aspired to become a therapist, and her academic achievements reflected her commitment to that goal. On the night of her disappearance, Judy had been spending time at Dunbar Hall, a dormitory where her friends lived. Around 2 a.m., she left Dunbar Hall to return to her own dormitory, Engelman Hall, which was just 300 yards away. Despite the short distance between the buildings, authorities believe she never arrived at her dorm room that night. This marked the last confirmed sighting of Judy Martins, and she has never been heard from again. Judy lived alone at Engelman Hall and didn't have a roommate, which meant no one immediately noticed her absence. Her disappearance went unreported until the following evening, when friends realized she had not been seen or heard from. It wasn't until 2 full days after she was last seen that university officials contacted her parents to inform them that she was missing. The initial investigation into her disappearance was complicated by the fact that most of the students had already left campus for the Memorial Day weekend, significantly limiting the pool of potential witnesses. Judy herself had planned to leave campus for a trip to New York with 2 friends, adding another layer of confusion to the early hours of the investigation. Authorities and Judy's family quickly dismissed the idea that she had left voluntarily. At the time of her disappearance, Judy was deeply engaged in campus life. She served as a dormitory advisor and also volunteered as a counselor at the university's Pregnancy Information Center. Her family and friends described her as happy and focused, with no apparent reason to run away. Her disappearance occurred just a week before spring semester final exams, making it even less likely that she would have chosen to leave on her own. Further fueling suspicion, almost all of Judy's personal belongings were found in her dorm room, including her eyeglasses, makeup, clothing, and money. Judy was known to never leave without her glasses or makeup, making their presence in her room particularly troubling. Only her purse, which contained a single credit card, was missing. The purse was never recovered, and the credit card was never used after her disappearance. Judy had recently ended a 5-year relationship with her boyfriend, but the breakup was described as amicable, and the two remained on good terms. Her family did not believe he was involved in her disappearance, a belief supported by his successful completion of a polygraph test. Despite the lack of evidence implicating him, police continued to explore all possible leads. One of those leads came from an unverified tip that Judy was working as a prostitute in the Cleveland, Ohio area. Acting on this information, Judy's brother tracked down a woman who bore a striking resemblance to her. However, upon meeting the woman in person, he confirmed she was not his sister. A possible suspect in Judy's disappearance emerged in the form of William John Posey Jr., who was living under the alias John T. Scorpione at the time. In 1978, Posey resided in an apartment approximately 10 minutes' drive from the Kent State University campus. 2 years after Judy vanished, Posey pleaded guilty to the abduction and murder of an Illinois woman. In 1981, he was convicted of kidnapping Iris Brown, who had disappeared in 1976 and whose body has never been recovered. In 2008, Posey admitted to murdering Brown, further cementing his reputation as a violent criminal. While he was never formally charged in connection with Judy's case, his history of violence and his proximity to Kent State at the time of her disappearance have made him a person of interest. Judy Martins grew up in a close-knit family in Avon Lake, Ohio, where she lived in the 33400 block of York Street when not attending college. She was the eldest of 3 siblings and graduated from Avon Lake High School in 1973. Before transferring to Kent State, she had initially enrolled at Ohio University. Her family described her as loving and dedicated, someone who maintained a strong bond with her parents and siblings. Just 10 days before she disappeared, Judy had visited her family to celebrate her sister's birthday and Mother's Day. Her parents have since passed away, but her siblings remain determined to find answers about what happened to her. Despite decades of investigation and countless efforts to uncover the truth, Judy Martins' case remains unsolved. The circumstances of her disappearance continue to haunt her friends and the Kent State community. Danny Maalo was last seen leaving his home on Graham Road in Silver Lake, Ohio, at approximately 2:30 p.m. on March 28, 2002. He lived with his parents and his brother, who all described him as a devoted family member and someone who maintained a close bond with his mother. At the time of his disappearance, Danny was a student at the University of Akron and was being supported financially by his parents while he was between jobs. After leaving his residence that afternoon, he traveled to the Spicertown area of Akron, where he made a purchase. However, he never returned home, and his family never heard from him again. His brother reported him missing 2 days later, alarmed by his unexplained absence. Compounding their concerns was the fact that Danny did not have a credit card, a bank account, or any cash on him when he vanished, leaving his loved ones with no indication of where he could have gone or why. The first major development in the case occurred in early April 2002, when Danny's white Plymouth Duster was discovered abandoned on a runaway truck ramp along a major highway near the border of West Virginia and Maryland. The car, which featured white aluminum rims and bore the Ohio license, plate number COD 3588, was found unlocked and undamaged. Inside, investigators located Danny's University of Akron student parking pass, but the car's license plate had been removed. The peculiar placement of the car raised immediate suspicions. Authorities believed that whoever left it there had done so deliberately, perhaps hoping to delay its discovery. Adding to the mystery, Danny's family noted that he had never been to West Virginia before and had not expressed any plans to travel there, making its location an enigma. This detail only deepened the questions surrounding Danny's disappearance. Danny's family was adamant that he had no personal problems, no issues at home, and no reason to leave without notifying anyone. His parents and brother described him as a focused and goal-oriented individual who had diverse hobbies, including physical fitness and racing carrier pigeons. Raised in the Eastern Orthodox Church, Danny had recently begun to explore an interest in Judaism, a shift that his family found intriguing but not concerning. They emphasized that he was a thoughtful, dedicated person who showed no signs of distress or dissatisfaction in his life leading up to the day he went missing. The circumstances of Danny's disappearance are as puzzling as they are troubling. His car's abandoned location, combined with the removal of its license plate, seemed to point toward foul play, yet no concrete evidence has ever surfaced to explain what happened to him. Since that day in March 2002, there has been no activity on his name, no confirmed sightings, and no leads strong enough to break the case open. Carla Loi was last seen on the evening of New Year's Eve, 2002, leaving El Grotto's bar in the 2300 block of West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio. She had left her home at 7 p.m. to go to the establishment, where she worked as an exotic dancer. Witnesses reported seeing Loi accompanied by an unidentified black man at the time of her disappearance. She has not been heard from since. There were reports suggesting that Loi may have attempted to travel to either Richmond, Virginia, or New York on the morning of January 1, 2003, possibly using a Greyhound bus or hitchhiking. Prior to her disappearance, Loi had lived at the 40 West Motel on West Broad Street in Columbus. At the time she went missing, Loi may have been involved in prostitution and had previous arrests related to this. Despite efforts to uncover her whereabouts, her case remains unsolved. Her family believes she is deceased, but no concrete evidence has surfaced to confirm her fate. Zaden McNight, a 4-year-old boy, disappeared along with his mother, Nichelle Zaden McNight, from Dayton, Ohio, on March 25, 2014. The last known sighting of Nichelle was at her home in the 600 block of Homewood Avenue at around 11 p.m. that evening. She was in the company of her ex-boyfriend, Antoine Anderson, at the time. This would be the last time anyone saw either Nichelle or Zaden alive. Nichelle's mother became alarmed when she discovered that Nichelle hadn't shown up for work at either of her 2 jobs for several days. She reported Nichelle and Zaden missing soon afterward. As the investigation began, attention turned toward Anderson, who was known to have had a contentious relationship with Nichelle, and who was with her on the night she disappeared. Anderson, who had active warrants out for his arrest, quickly became a person of interest. Law enforcement attempted to bring Anderson in for questioning, but events took a tragic turn. When officers attempted to pull Anderson over during a traffic stop, he fled the vehicle and ran into a wooded area. 2 officers gave chase, and Anderson produced a firearm, initiating a shootout. The standoff ended when Anderson fatally shot himself in the head, effectively cutting off a critical source of information in the investigation. On April 11, 2014, an anonymous caller claiming to be a friend of Anderson directed the police to search an area behind the Riverview Park Apartments in the 4300 block of Riverside Drive near the Stillwater River. During the search, authorities discovered Nichelle's body. She had been shot twice in the head and left in a wooded area. Despite the grim discovery, there was no trace of Zaden. As the investigation continued, suspicion fell on Tonisha Harris, another woman connected to Anderson. Harris had dated Anderson and was later found to have been deeply entangled in the events surrounding Nichelle's murder and Zaden's disappearance. Evidence found in Harris's home on Birchwood Avenue suggested a horrifying scene. Investigators discovered blood that indicated both Nichelle and Zaden had died there. Additionally, Nichelle's shoes, her bank cards, her driver's license, and social security cards for both her and Zaden were recovered. Harris was arrested on April 30, 2014, and charged with failure to report a crime, evidence tampering, and 2 counts of gross abuse of a corpse. Investigators determined that Harris had used Nichelle's bank cards without permission, spending nearly $3,000 before Nichelle went missing. Nichelle had confronted Anderson about these thefts shortly before her disappearance, suggesting a possible motive for the violence that followed. Harris ultimately pleaded guilty to evidence tampering and failure to report a crime and no contest to gross abuse of a corpse. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison. While Harris maintained her innocence in the actual killings, authorities believe she played a key role in the aftermath, including cleaning blood from her basement and the trunk of her car. They suspect she was intimately involved in the deaths of Nichelle and Zaden, but did not have sufficient evidence to charge her with the murders themselves. Despite exhaustive searches, Zaden's body has never been found. Investigators have stated that they have no hope that Zaden is still alive and firmly believe he met with foul play. His case remains unresolved. Leon Monser, a man who disappeared without a trace on February 18, 1982, left his home at the 65,000 block of Indian Run in Bel Air, Ohio, and was never heard from again. His disappearance is shrouded in mystery, with several unusual circumstances surrounding his case. Notably, Monser left behind his cigarettes, which was completely out of character for him. A few days after he vanished, his wife, Irene Zimmerman, made a chilling discovery. His gray Dodge Aspen was found idling in a ditch near the entrance of Anco Mining Road. The car was covered in mud. The driver's side door was wide open. The dome light was faintly illuminated, and the keys remained in the ignition. Inside the vehicle were Monser's coat, cigarettes, a lighter, and some loose change. The interior of the car also appeared disturbed, suggesting that a struggle had occurred. The mystery deepened when it was revealed that Monser had received a disturbing note shortly before his disappearance. The note was composed of letters cut out from a magazine, and it read, "Leave it alone, or you are dead." Monser, however, dismissed it and threw it away without any apparent concern. The identity of the person who sent the threatening note remains unknown, and it's unclear if the note was related to his eventual vanishing, though it adds a sinister layer to the story. At the time of his disappearance, Monser was juggling 3 jobs, and his personal life was marked by turmoil. He and Irene were in the middle of a divorce, and Monser's heavy drinking, volatile temper, and infidelity further complicated their relationship. He was known to be physically abusive toward both his wife and his girlfriend. Irene, in particular, described Monser as overprotective, claiming he didn't want her or their 3-year-old daughter to leave the house without him, and was adamantly opposed to having their pictures taken. This controlling behavior paints a picture of a man whose personal demons may have influenced his tragic fate. Strangely, there were reports of sightings of Monser after his disappearance. Irene claimed that, for months following his vanishing, she and their daughter were followed by a man driving a truck. For 2 years, an individual was also said to have lurked in the shadows outside their home, and Irene believed that this person might have been Monser himself, attempting to watch over his child from a distance. To make matters even more unsettling, Irene received a series of anonymous phone calls, one of which informed her that Monser had been killed. However, this information could never be verified, and it remains another eerie piece of the puzzle. In 1988, Monser was declared legally dead, and his mother was able to collect his life insurance policy. The case, however, was marked by complications. The original police file was lost, only to be rediscovered later, prompting a reopening of the investigation in November 2007. Despite the renewed efforts to solve the case, Monser's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. James McQueen and his best friend, John Hunley, vanished without a trace on the afternoon of October 15, 1964. The 2 boys, both in the 3rd grade and inseparable companions, were last seen walking to John's home in Fairfax, Ohio, from the Frisch's restaurant on Worcester Pike in Cincinnati at around 4 o'clock p.m. They were reported missing later that evening at 10:30 p.m., and despite extensive investigations, neither of them was ever seen again. Initially, authorities pursued the theory that the boys had run away based on reports that John had mentioned plans to do so to his friends. Acting on this assumption, local police alerted law enforcement agencies across the country, suspecting that the boys might have hopped onto a freight train and left the area. However, as time passed without any sightings or leads, the runaway theory was abandoned. Their disappearance took on a darker tone as hope dwindled and no clues emerged. The case grew even more unsettling due to its proximity to another tragedy in Fairfax, just 2 months earlier. In August 1964, a 4-year-old girl was abducted and murdered in the area. Her killer, a 13-year-old neighbor boy, confessed to the crime and was apprehended. Speculation arose that there might be a connection between her murder and the disappearance of James and John, but authorities found no evidence to link the 2 incidents. 3 years later, in 1967, the investigation took an unexpected turn when a 17-year-old Marine stationed in California confessed to murdering the boys. The man, who had lived in Fairfax at the time of their disappearance, claimed he stabbed James and John to death and buried their bodies. However, he later recanted his confession, explaining that he had fabricated the story to escape his military service. He subsequently passed a polygraph test and maintained his innocence, leaving investigators with no concrete evidence to support his initial claims. Despite the numerous leads, theories, and the tireless efforts of law enforcement, little tangible evidence has surfaced in the decades since James and John disappeared. Both boys lived only 3 blocks apart in 1964, and investigators believe their remains are likely still somewhere in the Fairfax area. Their case remains unsolved. Roger McQueen, a young woman from Cleveland, Ohio, was last seen on June 24, 2022, when she was spotted getting into her silver and black 2018 Nissan Sentra at a gas station located at East 131 Street and Harvard Avenue around 7:30 a.m. This would be the last confirmed sighting of her, and what followed remains a perplexing mystery. Just a few hours later, at 11:40 a.m., McQueen's car was spotted at Broadway and Union Avenue, but there were several alarming changes. The vehicle was now marked with noticeable bullet holes in the roof and passenger side, and its hubcaps were missing. Even more concerning, a fake dealer license plate was displayed in the rear window. McQueen was no longer in the car, and a male driver was behind the wheel. Authorities were able to identify and interview this man, though he remains a part of the unresolved puzzle. Despite the discovery of her car, there has been no sign of McQueen, and the vehicle has never been recovered. Her family, friends, and the authorities have been left with more questions than answers. A photo of the vehicle is included with her case summary in the hopes of generating new leads, but as of now, McQueen's whereabouts remain unknown. At the time of her disappearance, McQueen was a student studying music at Rosedale Bible College in Rosedale, Ohio, having returned home to Cleveland for the summer break. She had previously attended Cuyahoga Community College, and her academic pursuits were part of a bright future that has been tragically interrupted. Her family has expressed concern for her safety, particularly because of a potentially abusive relationship she may have been involved in. However, despite these concerns, there is little concrete evidence to point to foul play or to help authorities determine the cause of her disappearance. McQueen left behind 2 children and 5 older sisters, with whom she was very close. The Cleveland Police Department is investigating, but so far, McQueen's case remains unsolved.